I realize that what I have to say today may be more palatable if it came from a female preacher rather than a male preacher. So if I've gone wrong today, if the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart do not hit home, this is how I know who my friends are, is after worship you say, not "I love you, but I think you've gone off the tracks." You would say, "I love you and you've gone off the tracks." So the typical commentary about this, what I would regard quite difficult gospel story, goes something like this. You have a woman who is stooped over and she sees things at a slant, or she cannot see beyond her toes. Her worldview is blocked by her posture. And even though she doesn't ask for this healing, even though she has just come to worship, we assume, rather than seek out some kind of healing, she would obviously want to be healed by Jesus. And so the good news is that there he is. The traditional commentary would also read that the synagogue leader, he also, at least metaphorically, sees things at a slant. He cannot see beyond his own toes. Doesn't he know that healing is more important than Sabbath regulations? What a jerk. We should not be like him. And so then the woman is healed by Jesus, and she is able to see out into the world and see all of its beauty. And she leaves Jesus, the teacher exemplar, to show that, yes, indeed, healing is more important than Sabbath regulations. That grace is more important than legalism. And Jesus is better than any other religious leaders, especially Jewish religious leaders. If only they would go ahead and get his message, come on over and join the right team right now, the world would be a better place. And so to conclude this interpretation, God is good. Jesus shows us how. God is waiting to grab you and heal you, to take the ways in which you are bound, loosen the ropes, and free you into wholeness and health. And that is not a bad message. I've heard plenty of worse things in church in my time. I've had my fair share of lessons that were built on shame and guilt and blood and pain. I've heard my portion of sermons and Sunday school lessons that loved the cross a little too much, loved the nails in the cross a little too much, kind of skipped over the resurrection bit. I've heard my portion of sermons about family values. So a narrative of liberation, that would be a bit more of my cup of tea. I could always go for a dose of examining my infirmities, my neuroses, Lord knows I have many, my faults, Lord knows I have many, my spiritual failings, and hear a good word about Jesus laying on hands and freeing me and freeing you from all of that and more. I'd like to name and claim my demons and say I don't have to live with that garbage today. But I am a little bit bothered this morning. The gospel story has actually got on my nerves. I love the good news of the gospel, don't get me wrong. I love the message of liberation that Jesus preaches. I love the cross of Christ. I love that the cross of Christ does, in fact, help me understand the world. Yes, it does. That if we can kill Jesus, what else or who else could we as human beings kill? I love the good word that death is not in God, death is not a part of God, and therefore Jesus had to be resurrected. That hope had to overcome the last word of death. That Jesus had to descend to the dead, as the Creed says, and be raised again. I love the good news that love wins. I love the gospel story. But this part of the gospel story in Luke 13 bothers me. And I know that if the gospel never bothers you, you're probably not wrestling with it. So I'm wrestling with this today. The Gospel of Luke has a story to tell. Luke needs to get on with the story and get Jesus to Jerusalem and get Jesus on the bad side of the Jewish religious leaders. And he's in such a rush to tell that story that he doesn't tell all the story. Luke is in such a rush to get Jesus arguing about Sabbath laws and irritating synagogue leaders and demonstrating that the crowd is so completely impressed by Jesus and what he does and what he's got to say, that the woman, the nameless woman in this story, becomes just a prop. The traditional commentary, the traditional meaning omits all of the details about the woman and her name. She just talks about her spine. The story omits that there's some quite serious damage going on here. Damage to us in letting these details slide. Damage to the woman for dismissing her wants and needs. The story also damages the synagogue leader too by painting Jewish religious leaders as uncaring dolts, bound up in legalism that can never discover any kind of grace. The story damages the woman because we just assume that as she enters the story, that we know what she wants and what she needs. We also assume that after the episode is over, that she just lives happily ever after. The story never bothers to ask her if she wanted the healing to begin with. Are we at a place now in our culture or our religious culture where we can just go ahead and say that we should probably quit making assumptions about what exactly people need? This was part and parcel of my primary point last week when I was talking about South African women. That folks head off to Africa and to all sorts of places around the world to feed children and to preach the gospel as if there are no cans of soup in Southern Africa and there are no church folks leading worship there. And actually what the women that I know in Southern Africa, what they really want is guidance and education about enterprise, about how to make money from their businesses in their communities while they get on with raising their kids in their homes, growing their crops, taking care of their elderly and infirm. But we as Westerners bring assumptions and SpaghettiOs. Our story never stops to ask the woman if she wanted this particular healing. And it's true, she seems pretty content in the aftermath. But after the fact, the story never stops to ask her what she wants or needs afterward. She's free of her infirmity, and now what? This story damages us or damages our religious and spiritual culture because this kind of story has led to all sorts of quackery. You see it on television. Have any of you ever been flipping through the channels and stopped on the Trinity Broadcasting Network? Have any of you ever seen Benny Hinn's crusades around the world? Have you ever seen the greatest hits of televangelists manipulating and taking advantage of those who struggle to walk or see or hear? When people are used as props for a show, is that any different than a magic act? Well, yes, at least a magician has the decency to not manipulate people's spiritual lives and wallets while they're doing their act. Countless people who have had infirmities healed at religious revivals have stated that the effects were temporary or non-existent, that they came to the big show with a cane and were shoved into wheelchairs so that they could get out of it when the televangelist told them to. Part of the resentment is that they know that they were a prop. That if a televangelist was serious about them as people, he'd probably check in once in a while and see how they're doing. But in this story, Luke is in such a rush to get Jesus arguing about Sabbath laws and irritating synagogue leaders that the woman here is also used. She serves a purpose, and then the text moves on. We hear the voice of Jesus proclaim her identity as a daughter of Abraham. We hear a strain of validation and a willingness to tarry a while in the moment from Jesus, but all too soon Luke gives in to the idols of shininess, crowds celebrating and hollering, the idols of honor and shame, and the woman disappears from view. The woman disappears from view. Folks, I'm not going to pretend that I understand the intricacies of French society. I would never want to proclaim that. I will simply say that I have been following with great interest the news stories recently from France about how women and their opinions and wants and needs in 21st century modern France have been disappearing from view. Some of you are very familiar, I'm sure, with the story about the burkini bans that have been happening in coastal towns in France. A burkini is an outfit that a woman might wear to the beach in order to swim that covers up much of her body and covers up her hair. There is now a great deal of sensitivity around the role of Islam in French society, and the story goes that many people in France believe that traditional or religious attire is oppressive and is a signal of women's oppression at the hands of traditional Islamic teachings. That Islam teaches people how to dress, how to be modest in such a way that it is not possible to be truly French in the 21st century. The French Prime Minister this week said, there is this idea by nature that women are harlots, impure, that they should be completely covered. This is not compatible with the values of France and the Republic. Faced with these provocations, the Republic must defend itself. Today, Muslims in France are taken hostage by these groups, these associations, these individuals who advocate for wearing the burkini and would have you believe that the Republic and Islam are incompatible. A scholar at the University of Toulouse answered by saying that the burkini was created by Western Muslim women who want to conciliate their faith and desire to dress modestly with recreational activities. What is more French than sitting on a beach in the sand? And here we are telling Muslims that no matter what you do, even there, we do not want you. Some of you may remember Dalia Moghahed when she appeared on The Daily Show back in January with Trevor Noah. He asked her about wearing hijab. She said that wearing hijab for her and her understanding is a way of a woman privatizing her own sexuality. That wearing hijab means that her own sexuality is not a public matter, it's something that is done in private. What does it mean, she asked Noah, for us to say that if a woman privatizes her sexuality, she is oppressed and that she has had her power taken away from her? And Noah answered, that a woman only has power if she looks sexy in public? ? What is more patriarchal or paternalistic? Insisting that a woman not wear long sleeves to a beach, or insisting that she must be nearly naked in order to fit in? Isn't freedom and the luxury of freedom actually allowing for the possibility that a woman wants to dress modestly because she wants to dress modestly? Why can't we take our friends at the Peace Islands Institute at face value when they say that their girls are given the choice to wear hijab as an act of religious devotion, that some will wear it for a while and others will take it off and others will put it on later in life as they become more spiritually attuned? Why is that so incomprehensible for us? Why is it that something more sinister must be going on? Our gospel story today speaks of freedom, but never stops to ask the woman what freedom looks like before Jesus gets a hold of her, and he does ask her to come to him. Never stops to ask her after she's been liberated what freedom looks like for her now. The traditional commentary of liberation is a fine commentary, but I'm wondering if the gospel is asking us in the right here, right now, as we, as Americans, figure out how to relate to other faiths and people from other cultures, and as we continue to hear the calls to build the wall and throw them out and litmus tests for fitting in, that we might be our better selves in asking ourselves what freedom really looks like. Freedom is a luxury. I do understand that. Freedom isn't free, as they say. The freedom is an extravagance that many in the world do not have. And so we live in a tension now between the narrative of freedom in our culture and the true luxury of being free. The luxury of being free to ask others what they want and need rather than assuming that we know. The luxury of asking the young how they see their world and including their thoughts into our worldview. There is a great luxury in asking. The word luxury, like the words grace and gratitude, have been cheapened and diluted by the volume of times we use them for almost any product or any experience. Luxury, the state of great comfort, extravagant living, opulence, sumptuousness, grandeur, magnificence, the lap of luxury, a bed of roses, the land of milk and honey. Luxurious living, the promised land of milk and honey, is according to the scripture and my own experience. Being afforded the opportunity to see past my own toes, to question and wrestle with the story, to appreciate the fact that the synagogue leaders' signals got crossed and call out the baloney that exists in having this woman remain nameless and disappear into irrelevance in the gospel narrative. I'm not even going to mock Acura's marketing slogan. Acura, the true definition of luxury. The true definition of luxury? Really? As if all the other definitions of luxury outside of a car manufacturer are false or less than. I recognize it's a competitive marketplace. But isn't the definition of luxury to suggest that differently abled people should be able to determine how they are discussed, what their hopes and dreams are, rather than it just being determined that one ought to live as the dominant culture lives? Shouldn't it be up to the bikini-clad woman on a beach in France or Florida or somewhere else to determine what is appropriate bathing attire for her religious and cultural sensibilities? Shouldn't it be up to a Muslim woman to determine if her power is rooted in her public sexuality or rooted in her intelligence, compassion, and devotion to God? Isn't it the very definition of luxury, a life well lived, for us also to recognize that the story unnecessarily shames the synagogue leader, as if all religious Jewish leaders in Jesus' day were completely lacking in compassion and grace? The text tells us that Jesus' opponents felt shame, but not that he was looking to put them to shame. They felt disgraced by the reaction of the crowds, the all too eager to see the mighty fall crowds, the easy laughter of mocking others, the first century version of seeing someone, quote, get destroyed or owned or called out. The shaming of the synagogue leader is another demon we let out of its ugly cage far too often now. The delight in someone getting destroyed or owned or called out on the internet, yucking it up about the powerful getting theirs, is the antithesis of what being put to shame by Jesus was all about. Jesus engages people in order to pursue balance in religious and cultural systems. See his constant discussion of bread and fish, which was unfairly taxed, the very basics of life that were taken from people, used as tools to reinforce status, submission, and subjugation. It was these things, bread and fish, Jesus chose to use, which became our great symbols in our tradition. The fish a reminder of how a dominant culture, the Roman Empire, forced people into a lack of freedom of expression. See crosses erected outside city walls as a tool for making sure you kept your mouth shut and your head down. And bread, our symbol of a common meal, sustenance for the journey ahead, shared at a common table where all, including Judas Iscariot, would be welcomed and fed. A life of luxury has no need to shame the other because of a boneheaded opinion, but rather in true freedom has the capacity to name a problem and work diligently toward balance. To put it another way, when your motivation is to shame the personhood of the synagogue leader, you have confused justice with vengeance. And we are getting very good at confusing justice and vengeance. What does it mean to be free today? What does it mean to live in luxury this morning? What does it mean for a father to ask his daughter and a husband to ask his spouse, or a grandparent to ask their grandchild what they really need, what they really want in order to be free? Free to live. Free to really live. May God's peace be with you all. Amen.